gotten mad and just said, screw it all, like,
Right.
you know, walk away from it all and give up on the church in general.
If you were like an atheist or, you know, some other denominations where suffering isn't a part of the religion, you look at suffering as just like something from a higher power, not something that's out of our control, out of other people's control.
Like being so removed from the idea of what suffering actually is and how it fits into our worldview. I think it's very damaging on a very spiritual level.
Okay. Well, thank you, Mike, for being here.
Thank you, Joe, for being our host.
Of course. So it's been a while since we last talked, kind of like in an interview form.
Yeah.
Just about like what's going on, and you know, we talked about you entering the church not that long ago, which is great. So welcome back.
It's nice to be back. You know? Yeah.
A lot's happened.
You know, the setup's changed quite a bit.
Yeah. Hopefully we're more clear to you guys.
Yeah, hopefully.
And the audio should be good if our producer's worth his salary.
Yeah, $0 an hour.
Yeah, so I guess today we're going to be kind of talking about some things that have recently happened and how that kind of works into this idea of suffering and kind of the life of suffering as a Christian and Catholic and why that's important. So it's a good topic because I think suffering is definitely something that's misunderstood.
Yeah, I think the suffering is like the high point of our faith.
Yeah.
You know?
I mean, when you look to the crucifix.
Yeah, it's literally like right there, you know? It's a powerful symbol.
It is, yeah.
Okay, yep. Is better?
Yeah, you can raise it or lower it, whatever you want.
He can't. He's got one arm. You guys will find that out why soon.
Is this good, buddy?
I think this is great. Thank you.
Sorry, that's bad on my
you
part.
just
I'm gonna scream in this mic when you sit down.
I'm gonna bring your other arm. No.
Just the ultimate mic check. Just the 1, 2.
All right. Yeah, so it is a symbol of our faith, you know, the crucifix. And so that's kind of the idea of what we'll be talking today. So, I mean, life update, I guess. You've got something going on there with your arm.
Yeah, I mean, of course, this is nothing compared to the cross. Like, you know, but,
yeah.
Just 1/4. Okay. But yeah, on I think March 3rd, I was coming back from Corpus Christi, and I got into a car accident with my friend. You know, we spun out on the highway. I was passenger. We hit a few guardrails, and then when I thought all was fine and good, I stood up and my arm was dangling. So, yeah.
Yeah, I hate to see it.
Yeah, my arm was pretty broken.
Yeah.
And it was a pretty painful injury at a tough point in my life, you know.
Yeah.
I remember everyone said I had a concussion. I remember the whole thing clearly, but like I guess I was like very like aloof. And when they were doing the X-ray, you know, because you had to move around a lot, they had to bend my arm. You know, I remember I just kept on like I was like, "Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name." I don't think they judged. I was going through it. But yeah, you know, that was a tough injury. You know, it came at a tougher point at my life. You know, like you could say I was in between homes. You know, there. Luckily, you know, things are a lot more stable now.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was tough. I had to put a pause on my education. And then my arm got infected too with the brace.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. That was a funny.
That was kind of scary. Yeah.
I had me and my roommate. We took off my brace, and he was like, "That doesn't look right." I was like, "It doesn't smell right either." Yeah, and yeah. So that suffered a lot.
Yeah.
You know? What's funny though is Amy, when I had everyone sign the old brace, I think she was like kind of joking a bit, but she said like offered it up to the Lord, and I always thought about that a lot. Like,
oh, really?
Yeah, like it was actually kind of ended up being helpful advice.
Oh,
like, because like whenever I was like sitting down, just like, wow, this hurts, but But then, I'd think for like a hot minute, I'd be like, thank you. Like, it hurts.
Yeah.
Like, this is, like a trial, during that whole period of my life, I could have easily just been like,
oh yeah,
gone all emo, like gotten mad and just said, screw it all. Like,
right.
Walk away from it all and give up on the church in general. But it's like, instead I kind of like turned my sights back to heaven, when I thought I was losing focus a lot, getting angry at everything.
Yeah.
Going through a lot of pain. It's like, offer it up to the Lord. I always thought about that. It was nice to have that there on the brace. So
yeah, I think what makes Catholics very centered people for the most part is that like there is a reason for suffering, and because like if you're like an atheist or some other denominations where suffering isn't a part of the religion, you look at suffering as just like something from a higher power, not something that's out of our control, out of other people's control. And it's just great, like, to be able to say, offer it up, and to give it meaning and not just have it be for nothing.
Yeah, exactly. It's like we were talking about the crucifix earlier, and it's like with the cross and what happened at Calvary and all that, the Passion. It's like that's a very tragic event. Like the Son of Man was brutally murdered, betrayed.
Yeah.
But at the same time, there's a very paradoxical nature to it. Not necessarily contradicting, but maybe to the uninitiated, it seems paradoxical because it's like, that's our salvation. It was through like the greatest act of suffering. It's like, the greatest tragedy in history, period. It's like God in the flesh was betrayed and killed and tortured and all these other, betrayed by all of his friends. And then at Mass, we look to that as our salvation. And it's like, if we're talking about a purpose to suffering, what greater purpose is there than to be united by the cross, by our own cross?
Yeah. What do you think is like the biggest misconception about suffering?
That it's a bad thing, necessarily. I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing.
Right.
Like, people go through suffering, like, or if we're gonna get into like quote unquote church drama, right? Like, you have, like, the idea of the prosperity gospel. It's, like, very bad idea, very, but it's, like, this idea where it's, like, if you do something good things come to you because God or whatever.
Yeah.
Like, you get rich because...
Right.
And it's, like, this... And I think it's very inappropriate for a number of reasons. I know a lot of people agree with me. But... And it's kind of just like the idea of karma with like a Christian sticker slapped on it,
Yeah.
But it's like, I think the thing there is like you're rich in suffering. You don't get rich by being good,
I think that also goes to a fundamental misunderstanding of us in this world.
Yeah.
Like, we have free will.
Yeah.
And from free will comes these like the good and the bad. I hate to call it that, but like these things that we perceive as bad and we perceive as good.
Yeah.
It's going to happen either way as a result of our free will, because if I have the free will to go and serve the poor, somebody else also has the free will to make the poor suffer, or like to make the poor, and there's that back and forth. And so I think when people really understand that free will is not like we're free to do those things, and the suffering comes regardless, like almost regardless of God. I think he permisses it, but without God, people are not understanding it.
Yeah, without God, there's no point to suffering. Like, again, like you mentioned, like for the atheist point of view, it's like, okay, not all atheists are nihilists or moral relativists, but at the end of the day, there's like no real point to suffering. There's no ultimate truth, as one might say.
Yep.
It's like, of course, atheists can still believe in objective truth, all things considered. But it's like, for the evil in this world, like I think it's St. Thomas Aquinas makes the argument that evil exists because God knows a greater good may come of it. Like, he permits evil for that purpose.
Yes.
Like, you get hit with a hurricane. That's pretty bad. Or like a tsunami.
Yeah.
But there is still like a good that can come out of it. People may go and they're able to exercise faith, hope, and charity. People will persevere. People will suffer, for who knows what. Not necessarily in the material sense, but in this very real spiritual sense, I think people ignore.
Yeah, because the ultimate reason for free will is that we could have an ultimate love. Because if love is forced, then it's not really love, right? And I think,
I think it's like right there in the definition of love. Like, love is to will the good of the other. You can't will something if you're forced to do it. Like,
Yeah, and that also brings up another point we were saying before, where, well, it reminds me of I don't know if you ever watched. Is it Evan Almighty? No. Yeah, Evan Almighty with Morgan Freeman, who plays God.
Yeah.
But there's a scene there where he's talking to the wife of the guy who's like building the ark, and he says, do you think God answers prayers by giving or giving the opportunity for? And because she says, she had been praying for like her family to be closer, but then she was getting, she's upset that her husband's like building this ark, and the kids were involved and all that, and so he basically says, do you think he's giving you the opportunity for this? And I think it goes back to what you were saying, where suffering is an opportunity for, and not like for nothing.
Yeah.
And I think it does often lead to a greater good.
It does, exactly. And it's like, and also that like notion of like the prayer, like, it's like we when God gives us opportunities, I think it's often through, the choice to suffer rather than the easy way out.
Right.
Because again, like we have this like conflict of like the material. I mean, it's not necessarily conflict in of itself, but this point of view, like you talk about how some people might view things in one way or another, where it's like you have the material world and the spiritual world, and people often think like they neglect the spiritual world because they think the material world is what suits their needs. Like earlier today, you were talking about like the man from China, coming here for the mass, and he starts skipping daily mass because of his job. And it's like, that's not necessarily bad. I mean, you need to support your family, but it's like when it comes to it, or something like, for example, giving money to the poor, it's like, where's this, like there, I think there's always a moment where it's like the spiritual benefit always outweighs the material benefit.
Yes.
Like, you're like, I remember, I was at church last Sunday, and I had like my last few dollars in my wallet, and I was like, man, like like here they come, like almsgiving, like what do I do? And I was like, why not? Like, not necessarily because maybe an increase of grace, but just like why not? There's a better need, than just a brief material what have you.
Yeah, I think what's also hard for people to understand is like you were saying, suffering is a spiritual practice, basically. And it often, because we're so into the materialistic, we're so into the physical world, we often neglect taking it to the spiritual side. And so you say like, just offer up the pain. And it's like, well, it's just like, for most people, it's just pain.
Yeah.
It's nothing more than just the physical pain.
Exactly. You're definitely right there. It's like, again, that's one thing like I realized. It's like when, like the week after the crash, I kind of was like laying on the couch because I couldn't even go up the stairs, and it was a lot of pain. I was like, oh man, I could feel my arm wiggle like it was a chicken wing. It was, and I remember sitting there thinking like, this is as much as a spiritual battle as it is, like a physical battle, like.
Yeah.
Because again, it could have been that moment where it's like, God, was like. Not like God. It could have been a moment where I could have turned away from God. I could have walked away from the faith. I could have been like, wow, this stinks. This is, big stupid. But what it ended up being was like you're talking about the idea of prayer. It's like, like suffering to mold me better, my faith, I think. Like to prove, I guess, in a sense, that like, it's like, this is my faith. Like it's to suffer and offer it up to the Lord.
Yes. And something I found out recently in a confession by a priest, he said, temptations aren't, and like kind of, talking about temptation here, temptations aren't necessarily a bad thing because God is permitting it so that a greater good can come out of it.
Exactly.
And I was like, damn, he just like dropped the mic on that. I'm like,
1, 2.
I'm like, if temptation really is an opportunity to grow, then maybe I shouldn't be praying to not be tempted or for this not to happen, but I should be praying for more strength and more, gifts of the Spirit to overcome the temptation, not ignore the temptation. And the same thing with suffering. Rather than pray for no suffering, pray to overcome the suffering, because that's going to bring us closer. And on the cross, we see that that is the ultimate. Jesus was tempted in the desert. So
and he was tempted in the garden again.
Yeah, but his ultimate form of giving, his ultimate reconciliation for us, was the suffering.
Yeah, and that's why I like the Passion a lot, like the scene where because it starts out with Jesus in the garden. It's like praying that that the hour may not pass, but like but the chalice may pass to another hand or something. And it's like, and there it's like Satan whispering in his ear, but then the snake comes out, almost like telling him don't do this, and then he stomps on the snake still in the garden. And it's like right there, I think, is like the triumph of humanity, or the triumph of Christ. It's like, I mean, of course on the cross that's like the truth, but like in the garden it's like he could have, I mean, the whole thing with him being God in the flesh, but like hypothetically, he could have, and that would have been him avoiding his suffering, staying alive. But there was no greater spiritual gift that, and by going through with his suffering, we had salvation for all of humanity. Right. And it's like in that same breath, like you're talking about, you should pray for, to learn how to get stronger from suffering. It's that same concept of, not necessarily fleeing from it. I mean, of course, maybe flee from temptation, but at the same time, if it just pray to be stronger when tempted rather than just to avoid it. Like, a swordsman isn't going to be a good swordsman if they skip all their training and all that. Right. They have to go through training. And it's like you have to get into a few duels before you can call yourself a good swordsman.
Okay, so then I guess what's advice you would give to somebody who's currently suffering, kind of like thinking back on like when you were in the thick of it? Yeah. Like, what's the one thing that you think people should be like keeping in the back of their head?
I don't think. Oh, okay. Well, I wouldn't say it's necessarily one thing, but I think things. Yeah, it's helpful, I think, to remember, you're not necessarily like alone in your suffering. I think one of the greatest gifts about being a Catholic is you're connected to the wider mystical body of Christ. Yeah. You have the faithful triumphant and the faithful here on earth. It's like, they all got your back. Like, I remember when I was going through it, Newman helped a lot. Coming here to Newman, it helped a lot. Again, I don't think I'd be part of it. I don't think I'd still be standing here if it weren't for Newman.
In a way, Jesus did carry his own cross, but he was helped carrying his cross. He was
with Simon, yeah.
And he wasn't alone suffering on the cross because, he had the Mary Magdalene and
Saint John
at the foot of the cross.
And that's where Mary's heart is pierced by the sword. It's like, it's you're never alone in your suffering. You always, ask for the intercession of the saints, of the angels. Ask for the prayers of your friend. It's there's help there. It's not alone. This world. A lot of people like to, I think, paint the world in very ugly colors. I don't think so. I think a lot of people really want to do good. Like, they really want to do good, and I think people do good a lot. It's just those very dark moments where people's vision of like what the world looks like gets clouded. Yeah. It's like, remember, like recently I was walking down County Street in New Bedford, and it hit me like how many churches are just on that street alone. It's a single street. They have like St. Lawrence, St. James. Like, I was like, what? This, like, where have these guys been? Like, and it's just a crazy amount of churches on a single street. And it's like, you really aren't alone. Again, like, it's just, remember, you're not alone, and people do want to help you. Remember, again, when I was like the first night of the crash, I was chilling in bed. I was like, dang, this stinks, And my roommate, I couldn't sleep because that's how bad like it all was. It's like my roommate came in at like 3 a.m. from his night shift, and he was like, yo, you good? And I was like, no. And then he just like randomly like fixed a blanket under my arm. And he's like, how about that? I was like, thank you. And he went off to do his thing. But it's like, again, people they always want to help. And again, if you don't have that immediate help,
right.
You still have the mystical body. You still have the body of Christ.
Yeah.
You can always enter your local parish and see what they offer. You never alone.
Yeah. Oh yeah. Yeah. I mean the church is a community, right? And it's not just some people, and I think that's where a lot of denominations kind of get it wrong, is they become just this one community, like within these four walls. But the Catholic Church and a lot of these the Universal Catholic Church is worldwide. It's universal.
That's what Catholic means.
Yeah. it's like they meant it or something.
Well, what did he mean?
So you can go to any Catholic church, and that's what I love about going to Mass at different churches, and even in different languages. Like as long as it's Novus Ordo, I know what the next steps are. I know I can at least pray in English and sometimes Portuguese. But like if I go to Spanish or the Byzantine, no, not Byzantine, Saint Anthony of the Desert. Maronite, or if they're doing an Arabic, like all these things, Arabic,
Syriac or something.
Syriac, yeah. I can understand what the next steps are.
Yeah.
And in that when you're suffering, you can go to any of these churches and find that community and find the help and the outreach.
Exactly. And it's like, again, that's like a whole topic in itself, like how like universal our church is. Like we have brothers and sisters all across the world worshiping the exact same sacrifice. Right. But I'd also like to say that the second big piece of advice too is like what I said earlier, is like offering up to God. Like your suffering has a purpose. So you're gonna get stronger out of this. Like it may be no matter what it is. It really doesn't matter. If you're suffering, you're suffering, and that's a whole other thing too. I've said that twice now, but people who like to compare suffering, it's just suffering is suffering. Yeah. And it's just. You should always offer it up to the Lord, no matter how small it is. Like you stub your toe, offer it up to the Lord. You're dealing with the loss of a loved one, offer it up to the Lord. It's all, He's always there too, and that always helps. Put it into focus. Right.
Yeah. I think in kind of talking about that humility that I was just reading from that letter by Pope Francis, like just making it less about yourself and more about that mystical body, more about the church and about upbringing the church and offering it up. And let me ask you this so that maybe the viewers can get some clarification. When you say when we say offer it up and we're offering it up to the Lord, can you expand on that?
Yeah. I'll try my best.
Because it's like I'm offering it up. Like I'm offering it. It's kind of like Michael Scott when he says, "I declare bankruptcy." It's like I am offering it up. But like, what does that mean?
To me at least, offering it up means like taking what I'm going through and kind of saying thank you. Like there's a purpose to this, and I'm offering up my suffering so that I may be like closer to you and your own suffering. Oh yeah. Like a whole thing with like the idea of like sanctification, and it's like thank you for this. I understand I have purpose, and I'm offering up my suffering to be closer to you. That's what it means to me.
Yeah, because on the cross, the sentence that he endured was really meant for us.
It was.
And so when we can kind of give back some of that suffering, we're kind of saying, thank you for what you've done. Let me help you out. And I think that's super important. I think that's something also a lot of people just forget, is like the crucifixion was suffering, but it was meant for us.
Yeah. That's another, and it's like that again. That's the whole tragedy of the crucifixion. It's like, like the most innocent and most righteous man to ever walk the earth was the one who suffered the punishment that murderers were supposed to get, that thieves, liars, and adulterers were supposed to get. And it's like, something really beautiful about that.
Right. I think another component of offering it up too is and we can do this at any time, but offering it up for like an intention. Like, let me offer it up, like, because I think when we're more aware of our own suffering, that you're kind of like giving it meaning. Yeah. And so you could say, well, I'm dealing with this, but like, what about those that are who are enduring more?
Yeah,
that's so, like, whenever I get like sick, or I'm like, I got a headache, or like, I usually don't like to take medication, like, like whatever, aspirin or whatever. And because it's like, how much more suffering is there in the world, that I'm going through right now.
If you have a common cold and a child just witnessed their house get blown up,
right?
You know,
it's like, why should I make my suffering more than somebody else's?
Yeah.
And so I think I've been trying to do that with a lot of things, mainly like offering up temptations, but like offering it up for others who are struggling or who are not, you know, not aware that their suffering has meaning even.
Yeah. You know,
and kind of help them in a way give their suffering meaning.
You are right there. And that's also been like another thing I'm trying to do like this past few weeks, especially with like a lot of the current conflicts in the world. You know, they're pretty gnarly, like modern warfare. I mean, warfare was never good, but it's very destructive now. And it's like, I'm sorry, that's just like one thing. It's just like when we talk about suffering, it's because you mentioned earlier about the example of the man from China. Again, to bring it up for the third time now. But I think there's like a lot to that story. Yeah. It's like where we live today, like in America, you know, like we have a lot of issues. We really do. You know, there's a lot of people who suffer in America every day. But there's a lot of like really horrible stuff that we are very removed from.
In America?
In America.
Okay.
Yeah, like, you know, if we look to some of the worlds that are ravaged by plagues and diseases, lacking hospitals and infrastructure, you know, we are like very, on one hand, lucky, but on the other hand, it's like how we perceive suffering, I think, is so far removed from theirs. Like, again, we're talking about like an earlier discussion, like how you can be more thankful for something if you actually, you know, have to earn it in a sense. Like,
yes.
You know, like imagine like most saints, they're not born during times of peace. No, they're born during times where their faith has to be tested, where they suffer. Like, again, look at all the early church fathers. Like, the easiest example to go to, but it's like these guys were the closest to Christ, technically speaking, all things considered. These guys, some of them knew the apostles. Like Saint Ignatius of Antioch. He knew, he like, there's like a popular story where there's a popular story where it's like he knew like Christ. He was like one of the children who visited Christ. Like, he knew him as a child, and then he goes and gets brutally martyred by the Roman government. But, you know, like, he offered that suffering up in a quite literal way. And it's like, I think our lack of dealing with a lot of these issues like war and famine and all that, like, again, not to say that we don't have our own problems, but I think for a lot of people today, it like makes us very disconnected from what suffering is.
I think that's one of the tricks of the devil too, is that, and I think there's a lot of tricks of the devil in America, but one of them definitely is like not having access to pain. And the American way is the easiest way, and like you should be living large, nothing, you shouldn't have any friction in anything you do. You know, if you want something, boom, I can Amazon it, and like it'll be my house in like 20 minutes now. It's like crazy. And in other places of the world where, you know, they have to, you know, maybe wait a day or two before they go to the ER, or maybe not eat 3 meals a day because they can only have food for 2 meals a day. Like, even small, like the small things are so compounded here in America that we're just blind. And whenever there's like a riff, it's like you go to the what is the urgent care? And you're waiting like 6 hours to see a doctor. It's because everybody's there for like a boo-boo. And it's like, do you really need to be here right now? Or could you have like not?
Well, even waiting, like to put it into perspective, it's like even waiting 6 hours. It's like you eventually get seen, right? But there's like a lot of places in the world right now where they just don't have any hospitals in the immediate region. It's like, you know, there's one giving birth without any anesthetics. It's like, we're really far removed from and it's like, sorry, it's like on one hand something maybe we could be grateful for, but on the other it's like it creates such a spiritual disconnect that it's like when like there's this kind of like boomery video, but I think it puts into perspective well too, where it's like kids in America, it's like they ask them questions like, what do you want in life? And some of them like, oh, I want to be TikTok famous. Others like, I want $1 million. One kid says, I want $100,000. You know, they're kids, but you know, but then it's children being interviewed in Gaza, And it's like the same exact questions. What would you want? What's your gift? And some kid says, I want to see my brother again. I want a place to sleep. Like, I want some like good food. Like I want a doctor. It's like we are very far removed to the point where it's like it is a trick of the devil, I think. Yeah. It's like, again, why I think saints usually come around during why we see that increase during times of hardship and suffering.
Yeah. That's even maybe another like trick of the devil. It's like he doesn't want us to suffer in that way. Like everything is so, we have such ease to access here that he doesn't want us to know there is suffering. Which is because
suffering unites us with Christ. Right. It doesn't do the opposite. It's him who wants to drive you away from suffering. And it's like, that's the thing. It's like, there's like a real evil in this world, and it's and it's not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily come in the form of suffering. It comes in the form of separating you from Christ, and that's what the like real evil in this world is.
Yeah. It's just a crazy world.
No, it is. It's like not even funny. It's like, because we do go through a lot of issues in America. Again, like, I can say this time and time again. Like what's happening in schools, like the tragedies that take place there. It's monstrous, but it's like what. Again, not to compare, but you have like around 17,000 kids dead in Gaza in the span of 6 months. Like, and we're over here. We get a little boo-boo at the ER, and we're like, "Ugh, why would God do this? Right? How dare he? Like, oh, got an extra hospital bill. Like, that stinks."
Yeah, yeah. I think putting another part of the suffering is, like we just said, like putting it into the perspective of the whole world, and I think that also helps lessen the suffering, which maybe is a good thing, maybe is a bad thing, but at least it'll give you more courage, maybe to offer it up and not to be so angry about it.
Yeah, to allow it to unite you with Christ, because again, that's what this faith is about. It's like we were talking about, like the whole universal body of believers. It's like the thing is, we're still a single body. We're separated by nations and languages, but we share a common faith, and it's a faith, I think, that's so like it's so unique that we are, again, described to be like one body. Like when we, like, the whole process of being Catholic is to unite us with Christ. That's what being a Catholic is, in suffering and in joy. That's so it's like, when we suffer, we're united with Christ. When we have the Eucharist, we're united in Christ in a very unique way. Yeah. Reconciliation. Every sacrament is to unite us with Christ. And, suffering as well, is a very key component of that which unites us with Christ. And I think, again, this, like, idea that, like, that like, being so removed from the idea of what suffering actually is, and how it fits into our worldview, I think it's very damaging on a very spiritual level. Yeah. If that makes sense.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. I think a lot of the problems we're seeing today is a lack of spiritual awareness. Yeah. And again, going back to, everybody thinks it's just a physical world, and there's no... I think most people do believe in something after here, but I feel like they've been so oppressed in their spirituality that they don't even have the headspace to, like, think about it.
Yeah, exactly. It goes back to, like, again, the idea of, like, the prosperity gospel. It's like these people, they call themselves Christian. A lot of them firmly believe they are Christian, but, like, the worldview they shaped isn't in line with what comes at the end. And it's like a simple verse, but St. Paul, I'm pretty sure he just St. Paul, he describes salvation as like a race. And I don't know about you, but when I'm in a race, I'm covered in sweat. My muscles are aching. I'm like huffing and puffing. I look like a mess at the end of the race. Like, races aren't pretty, even for the most experienced athletes. And again, it's a very small verse, but that's always what I take away from it, is that, like, it's going to be tough and you are going to suffer, but it's that suffering that allows us to persevere and grow stronger towards the end.
Right. Yeah, and I mean, the life of a Christian is never done. Like, there's always that growth. There's always that self-awareness that can come. I mean, I think it was maybe it was Benedict, or but, like, he was going to confession every week. Yeah. And it's like, well, what does a what does the Pope have to be confessing? And it's like, well, because he's also kind of being more spiritually aware of his own flaws.
Yeah.
And if we're not aware of our own spiritual and I guess physical flaws, then we're not growing towards that end, which is heaven.
Yeah, we're not. And again, it's like, you speak about it like, the life of the Christian never like really ends.
Mm-hmm.
There's a funny quote from this one show I used to watch. It's and basically it's like one of the characters, they're ranting, and they're like, closure is a made up thing made by Steven Spielberg to sell movie tickets. I love that quote a lot. But it's something, I think that's very applicable to like our lives. It's like we all want that moment. Like maybe it's, you think your marriage ends when you say I do.
Mm-hmm.
Some people maybe think your faith in the church ends after first communion. But that's like when it really starts ramping up. And, again, it, like St. Paul says, it's just a massive race.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to keep going and powering on through no matter what, until it's
done.
Yeah, until it's judgment.
Yeah.
You can't say when it's done.
Right.
That's on God.
It's anybody who's ever done a race, hiked, any physical activity, it sucks. Like
it does.
I like to say like it's like this sucks, and like just understanding it sucks.
Yeah.
And there's gonna be that suffering that comes with it. But part of the suck is knowing that there is a reward at the end.
Yeah.
Right? It's like, this sucks, but like I know that there's gonna be a great good at the end of it.
Yeah.
And so in this conversation about suffering, like in any race, there is suffering, but that the suffering is worth it because at the end you win the race.
Yeah.
And you get to the gates of heaven, and you get to get your eternal reward,
It's like, again, I know we're wrapping it up here, but it's like, I think if we're gonna look at what Faithful Amphibian is, it's like, this podcast specifically, it's like, what do you think, like, this concept of suffering, how would you say it like ties into the youth specifically? like I'm so serious, because like so many people are like, especially kids, like I don't blame them. It's like,
right, yeah. It's a lack of understanding.
Yeah.
I think because the youth aren't stupid.
No,
youth
they're
are
not.
smart. They have the most access to any information than any other generation before them. Yeah, you too.
Yeah, you do.
So the youth just need to know that suffering, like we've been saying now for 40 minutes, is nothing more than something that can unite us to Christ. And suffering, it is permissed by God, not because he wants us to suffer for nothing, but that because he wants us to partake in what he went through to get our reward on the cross. That may be like kind of jarbled, but and just that, suffering is not a bad thing. Suffering is something that can unite us to Christ on the cross, something that unites us to not only other Christians, other people, because everybody suffers, and that it's just something that when you suffer right and you offer it up, you're just full of grace, you're full of love, God's loving it. But yeah, do you have any advice for the youth?
Honestly, this is kind of like a little dumb advice, I think, but like, thank you, Dan. It's probably to maybe if you have a saint, that you are particularly close with, focus on that saint, like meditate on them, what they went through, and like use them as like a shining example. Like, again, like for me, St. Peter, I like St. Peter a lot. And it's like, that man probably he did mess up a lot, but he went through several instances of suffering, and every time just like think about how your saint grew in that. Like St. Peter, when he abandoned Christ at the cross, there's no doubt internal turmoil within him, but he definitely did look back. When he saw Christ again, he had the chance to run to him and then say, "Yes, I love you," 3 times and rise as St. Peter again. When he was, ultimately executed by the Roman government, like that was probably not pretty. Being crucified upside down, that's pretty bad. But like the whole thing is, he tied that all the way back to Jesus. He said, "I don't want to be crucified like that. Like, do me upside down because I'm not worthy to die like he did."
Yeah.
And he like united himself with Christ in a very, very unique way. Like even like what Saint Padre Pio with the what's it called? Stigmata, yeah. Even the Blessed Virgin, like she had to witness her baby die a very brutal death.
Yeah.
Like all these saints, they've all gone through suffering in very unique ways. And if you have a saint that you're close with, I guess again my advice would just be to tie yourself closer to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, hold them dear to your heart, ask for their intercession, meditate on what they went through.
Okay. Yeah. No, I mean, it was great talking about suffering. I think that it's something very misunderstood by most people who are entering the church, even in the church. And so hopefully this conversation was great for you guys. I know Mike has definitely been suffering a lot lately, even despite the arm. So he is a shining example of what it means to suffer rightly, to offer it up.
Thank you, Joe.
And to and it shows, right, in the fruit of your faith.
Yeah.
So thank you again for coming on.
Thank you, Joe. Thank you for remembering which hand.
I've been thinking about that the whole episode.
There you go.
All right. Well, thank you guys for listening, and we hope you have a great day.
Be blessed. Frog.
Oh, yeah. And Mike, are you still frogging?
Yes.
Still
yes,
frogging.
I do. Yeah.
Great.
Close one.